The medical bill wasn't addressed to me, but when it fell out of the junk mail pile in our kitchen that Tuesday afternoon in April 2021, I picked it up thinking it was another one of my endless dermatology follow-ups. And when I read the header, it said Seattle Nephrology Associates patient. James Mitchell services rendered. Hemodialysis treatment sessions March 2021 total. $43,847. And that's when I realized my husband of 28 years had been undergoing dialysis 3 times a week for months while telling me he was working late at the architectural firm, hiding end-stage kidney failure because he didn't want to burden me while I was recovering from my own cancer treatment. I'm 69 now, sitting in my daughter's guest room in Portland where I moved after the divorce, and I need to tell you about the day I discovered my husband had been secretly dying for 8 months while I thought my breast cancer was the only medical crisis our family was facing. Because sometimes the person who promises to be there in sickness and in health decides unilaterally that only one person's sickness counts. That April afternoon started ordinarily enough. I was Claire Mitchell, 58 years old, married to James Mitchell, senior architect, living in our Bellevue home we'd owned since 1995. Our twin sons, Adam and Nathan, were both living in California working in tech. I'd finished my last round of chemotherapy 2 months earlier, stage 2 breast cancer, caught early, good prognosis. James had been my rock through it all, or so I thought. The mail had piled up over the weekend. James usually sorted it when he got home from work, but I'd been feeling stronger, wanted to contribute. I was separating bills from catalogs when the envelope slipped out, thick, official, medical billing codes visible through the address window. I opened it without thinking. We'd been drowning in my medical bills for months. What was one more? Except it wasn't mine. Seattle Nephrology Associates across the top, James's name, and then words that made no sense. Hemodialysis, end-stage renal disease, treatment compliance excellent, continue current schedule. Monday/Wednesday/Friday for 7 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the nights James said he was working late, the nights he'd come home exhausted, sometimes with strange bruises on his arm. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the bill clutched in my shaking hands. There were line items going back to August 2020, 8 months. He'd been on dialysis for 8 months. My cancer diagnosis came in July 2020, my first chemo in August, the exact same time his treatment started. I went to his home office, the room he'd converted 2 years ago, said he needed space to work on projects away from firm politics. The door was usually locked when he wasn't home. Client confidentiality, he'd explained, but today it was unlocked. He must have forgotten in his rush to leave that morning. Inside, I found what I now recognize as evidence of systematic deception, a file cabinet drawer labeled Medical Personal. Inside, nephrologist reports dating back 3 years showing progressive kidney disease. Blood work showing declining function. A diagnosis, polycystic kidney disease, inherited condition, kidneys failing, would need dialysis eventually, possibly transplant. 3 years he'd known. Another folder. Dialysis center documents, treatment logs, insurance statements, everything showing regular 3 times weekly sessions since August. And then the worst part, a notebook. Spiral-bound, James's precise architect's handwriting filling page after page. The first entry was dated July 15, 2020. Claire's diagnosis today, breast cancer. She's terrified. I can't tell her about my kidneys now. She needs to focus on getting better. My situation can wait. I flipped through pages. August 3, 2020, started dialysis today. Told Claire I'm working late on the Henderson project. She was too exhausted from chemo to question it. This is working. September 12, 2020, Claire asked why I looked tired, said it's stress at work. She accepted it. Goods, November 20, 2020, nephrologist says I need to be on transplant list. Can't do that yet, would require family testing. Claire would find out after her treatment ends. January 8, 2021. Claire's scans look good, maybe 2 more chemo rounds, then I can tell her, just need to hold out a little longer. March 15, 2021, Claire finished chemo, so proud of her. But now she wants to get back to normal, cooking together, evening walks. How do I maintain the dialysis schedule without her noticing? Page after page of calculated deception, documented lies. Every excuse he'd made to hide his treatments while I was fighting cancer. I read until I couldn't see any more through my tears. When James came home at 7:30 p.m., his usual late work night, which I now knew was dialysis night, I was still sitting in his office, the bill and his notebook on the desk in front of me. He stopped in the doorway, his face draining of color. Claire, I can explain. Explain what? My voice was surprisingly calm. Explain the 8 months of dialysis you hid from me, the 3 years of kidney disease you never mentioned. The notebook where you documented every lie you told me. He stepped into the room, hands raised placatingly. I was trying to protect you, protect me. You let me think I was the only sick person in this marriage. You let me feel guilty every time I was tired, every time I couldn't do something. You played the devoted husband caring for his cancer-stricken wife while you were secretly dying. I'm not dying, end-stage renal disease, James. That's what the bill says, that's what your medical records say, you're in kidney failure. He sat down heavily in his desk chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. When were you going to tell me? I asked finally. Or were you just going to keep lying until you needed a transplant? I was going to tell you after you finished treatment, after you'd recovered. His voice was small, defeated. I finished treatment 2 months ago. I know. I didn't know how to start the conversation. I looked at this man I'd been married to for 28 years, who I'd raised 2 sons with, who I'd built a life with, and I realized I didn't know him at all. Who else knows he wouldn't meet my eyes? The boys, I told them in September, asked them to get tested for transplant compatibility, didn't want to burden you while you were in treatment. The boys knew. Our sons knew their father was dying and didn't tell me because he'd asked them not to, so everyone in this family knew except me. Claire, please understand. I understand perfectly. You decided I was too weak to handle the truth. You decided I couldn't be trusted with information about my own husband's health. You decided to lie to me every single day for 8 months. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, James? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you used my cancer as an excuse to hide your own medical crisis, and you documented it like some kind of experiment. He picked up the notebook, flipped through it. I was trying to track my symptoms, make sure I wasn't slipping. The lies were getting complicated. I needed to remember what I'd told you. The lies were getting complicated, I repeated. Do you hear yourself? The next few hours were brutal. James explained everything, the progressive kidney disease he'd been managing for years, the point where dialysis became necessary, coinciding exactly with my cancer diagnosis, his decision to hide it for my sake. Your nephrologist knew about my cancer? I asked. Yes, I explained the situation. He wasn't happy about it, but understood why I wanted to wait. So your doctor was complicit too. He kept telling me to talk to you, said secrets about health were dangerous, but I just kept thinking, after the next chemo, after she's stronger, after she's clear. And the boys. How are they handling knowing their father is sick? Adam's a match, nearly perfect compatibility. We were planning to schedule transplant surgery for June. I stared at him. June, 2 months from now. And you still hadn't told me. I was going to tell you this week, before we scheduled surgery, I swear. Whether that was true or just another lie, I'll never know. That night, I called both sons. The conversations were painful, tearful. They'd been torn between loyalty to their father and honesty with me. James had convinced them it was temporary, that he'd tell me soon, that they were protecting me while I was vulnerable. Mom, we're so sorry, Adam said, crying. Dad said you needed to focus on getting better, that knowing about his kidneys would derail your treatment. And you believed him. We didn't know what else to do. You were so sick, we were terrified we'd lose you. Dad seemed like he had it under control. Nathan was angrier at his father. I told him months ago this was wrong, that you deserved to know. He kept saying soon, soon. I should have told you anyway. After I hung up, I sat in our dark living room, processing. My husband had been in kidney failure for years, had started dialysis while I was in chemo, had recruited our sons into his deception, had planned major surgery without telling me. And he documented it all in that notebook like it was a project to manage. The next morning, I moved into our guest room. James tried to talk, to explain, to apologize. I couldn't hear it, not yet. I needed to understand what he'd hidden from me, so I made an appointment with his nephrologist. Dr. Sarah Chen was surprised to see me. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm glad you're here. I've been encouraging James to include you in his care for months. He told me yesterday, by accident, I found a bill. Her expression shifted to concern. He finally told you? No, I found out. There's a difference. I learned everything. The polycystic kidney disease James had inherited from his father, who died of kidney failure at 52. The slow decline over years, the point where dialysis became necessary. The transplant waiting list, Adam's compatibility as a donor. Why didn't you insist he tell me? I asked. I strongly encouraged it many times, but I can't force patients to share information with family members. Medical privacy laws, he said he'd tell you after your cancer treatment. I finished chemo 2 months ago. I know. I told him last week he needed to tell you before we scheduled transplant surgery. That you'd need to be involved in Adam's pre-op care, recovery planning, all of it. So he'd been planning to tell me. Eventually, when he had no choice, the divorce took 6 months. James fought it at first, claiming he'd only hidden the truth to protect me, that we could work through it with counseling. But I was done, not because he was sick, not because he needed a transplant, but because he'd made every major medical decision for 8 months without my input, because he'd recruited our sons into lying to me, because he'd documented his deception like a business project, because he'd fundamentally not trusted me to handle the truth about our lives together. The boys were devastated. Adam still donated his kidney surgery was in July 2021. I was there for his recovery, separate from James. Nathan struggled with anger at his father for creating the whole mess. The transplant was successful. James's new kidney functioned well. He retired early from the firm, moved to a smaller condo in Seattle. We communicate only about the boys and grandchildren. I'm 69 now, living in Portland near Nathan and his family. My cancer remains in remission 5 years clear as of last month. I'm healthy, active, grateful, but I'll never forget the feeling of sitting in James's office, reading his notebook of lies. Discovering that while I was fighting cancer, my husband was fighting kidney failure and had decided I didn't deserve to know. People ask if I regret divorcing him. If I'm bitter, I'm not, I'm sad. Sad that 28 years of marriage ended because one person decided unilaterally that honesty was optional. Sad that my sons were put in an impossible position. Sad that James's illness became something to hide rather than something to face together. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful I found out when I did. Grateful I had the strength to leave. Grateful I didn't spend more years with someone who thought love meant protecting me from truth. The medical bill that fell out of the junk mail that day, I kept it, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder that I'm stronger than anyone thought, strong enough to survive cancer, strong enough to leave a marriage built on lies, strong enough to rebuild at 60. James sent a letter last year, said he was sorry, that he'd handled everything wrong, that he'd let fear drive him to make terrible choices, that he understood why I left. I wrote back. Said I forgave him for my own peace, not his, that I hoped he was healthy, that I was glad Adam's kidney was working, that the boys deserved parents who could coexist civilly, but I also said I'd never understand. Never understand how he could document 8 months of lies in a notebook and think that was protecting me. Never understand how he could look me in the eye every day and hide something so fundamental. In sickness and in health goes both ways. I held up my end through his crisis. He decided his sickness counted more than honesty. That's not partnership. That's not marriage. That's not love. If you're reading this and you're hiding a medical crisis from your family, thinking you're protecting them, you're not. You're robbing them of the chance to support you. You're making choices that affect everyone without their input. You're building a foundation of lies that will collapse eventually. The truth has a way of surfacing. Medical bills get mixed up with junk mail. Notebooks get left in unlocked offices. And when the truth comes out, the betrayal isn't the illness, it's the deception. I survived cancer. I survived discovering my husband's secret dialysis. I survived divorce at 60, and I'm thriving now. Not despite those experiences, but because of them. Because I learned I'm stronger than I knew. Because I learned that being protected from truth isn't the same as being loved. Because I learned that starting over is always possible. James got his transplant. I got my truth. We both survived, but only one of us is truly healed. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. See you in the next one. Till then, take care.